Today's guest on Life and a Living is Steve Orrin, who is the Federal CTO at Intel. And in the interview, he explains exactly what the Federal CTO does and the work that he's involved in. But it's really interesting because it's an interesting time for businesses in terms of cybersecurity, people working remotely. You talk about cloud computing. Also, the role that AI and how companies should be preparing for that. So we cover quite a range of topics on that subject and how the technology can support the shift in working practices. So really encourage you to sit back and listen to the Federal CTO of Intel, Steve Orrin. Steve, thank you so much indeed for being a guest on A Life and a Living. It's a real honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, John.
Well, maybe you could just give a little bit of background, because I know your title is Federal CTO of Intel, which sounds interesting, but I'm not exactly sure what Federal CTO means and how important the federal piece is in that, which I assume it is. But maybe you might just explain what your role is in Intel.
Sure. So as a federal CTO, my role is to understand the federal government use cases, their environment, the technologies that they need to adopt in order to meet their enterprise and mission needs, and help them understand the technologies that Intel and its ecosystem bring to bear for those architectures, both today and in the future and the future roadmaps. And it comes across everything from Internet of Things to cloud to AI to cybersecurity. On the flip side, it's understanding those requirements and those mission areas and being able to translate that back to the Intel business units so that we're building to those use cases, building to those needs, and in many cases helping to design and build solutions in order to enable the government mission or the government enterprise requirements that are oftentimes representative of the larger industry, but with more advanced security needs or larger data set needs than you would have in certain other industries or verticals. And so it's really a two-part role where I'm focused on the technology that the business units are trying to build and helping their roadmaps to meet the customer need, and at the same time helping the customer to achieve their goals and mission needs with the technologies we have today and that are coming in the future.
Okay, that's great. That gives me a good understanding of it. In terms of, the audience for this podcast, as I said to you previously, is I work with a lot of people with people in large corporates, with business owners. But and I want to go through some of the things that you mentioned there. But I know that you're an expert and your core expertise is on cybersecurity. What do companies need to really pay attention to? Because we all kind of hear, okay, cybersecurity, the risks and all that sort of stuff. But what do they actually need to pay attention to? So if you're a leader in a business, what do you need to be concerned about?
That's a really good question. And the challenge we have today is that there's so many different security threats coming at us from all different angles. It's hard to really grapple with it. I think the three things that we have seen over the last 6 to 10 months that really highlight it is, number one, everyone is a target. And I think that's something that's fundamentally become clear, is that in the past, you would think only regulated industries, so financial services, obviously government, maybe healthcare. But the more recent attacks we've seen, whether it be JBS with the meatpacking industry and the pipeline attack, some of the McDonald's data breach, the clear thing for all business leaders is that no one is immune. Everyone is a potential target, so everyone needs to take a good look at their security and at the protection of their data and their assets. The other thing that's really important to understand is that it's not a one or a nothing. It's a risk calculation. I think that's the other thing that a lot of business owners and enterprises are starting to grapple with, is it's not, well, if I put in this one security technology or buy this one vendor's product, I've solved my problems. It's understanding the risk of the various different kinds of assets and services you're providing to your customers, to your employees, and what are the right controls, the right security for that risk appetite, for those threats that you're dealing with, and that it can fluctuate across time. As new risks get introduced or new services get delivered, new security controls are going to be needed. That risk-based approach, which was documented a couple of years ago by the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, that was published and adopted by a lot of large organizations, as well as what we're seeing right now with some of the supply chain security initiatives going on in light of the more recent SolarWinds attacks. It's really looking at how do I build the right risk-based approach for my security. Those are two key things that I think a lot of business owners need to take to heart. And then the last piece of the puzzle is everyone needs to go look at what are their current state of security. Security goes stale very quickly within an organization. So you need the term that's being used now is continuous monitoring, continuous detection, continuous controls, as opposed to we do an audit once a year kind of approach. And I think those three things are what is changing and what's helping business owners grapple with the fact that every week we have a kind of attack, a new malware, a new ransomware event that we all have to be aware of.
Okay, and I want to come back because I'm making an assumption that you're only as strong as your weakest link in all of this, and if you take the shift over the last 18 months where people are kind of working from home, has that greatly amplified the risk and exposed a lot of risks?
So let me pull that question apart into two areas. Starting with the notion that you're only as secure as your weak link is absolutely true. It's a fundamental in the cybersecurity space. I think part of the challenge there is oftentimes folks get too focused on particular threats or particular attacks. It's the idea of understanding what that weakest link is. The weakest link just isn't I have a vulnerability and therefore I must put all of my resources on closing that one vulnerability. It's understanding that vulnerability in light of everything else. And so the notion of weakest link is really looking at the weakest link in light of all the other links you have. And that's, again, going back to a risk calculation as opposed to what we call the shiny object approach. The piece that you really highlight there, though, is the change in ways that companies are doing business today with their employees and with their partners. The move to work from home, the move to remote, in some cases the move to get rid of satellite offices and go fully remote for some organizations, has fundamentally shifted the risk calculation. A lot of the controls that organizations put in place to protect, whether it be firewalls and antivirus and detection technologies, were built with an assumption that 90 to 95% of the organization was going to be generally working from an office building that was controlled by the company, that was owned by the company, that had guards or get passes to get into the building, that you had a network that was confined to that building. And even if you'd created some systems to help with remote users or traveling salespeople, those were still a small subset of the overall population. When the shift happened to going full remote working and teleworking, it put a real strain on those systems, and a lot of things had to be put out really quickly. The risk calculations have to be redone. The security controls that you're going to put in place have to be rethought for how you're going to do security for a 90% or more telework or remote workforce. And even as we start to look at what's that new normal, we're already seeing most major companies looking at a hybrid approach. And so we may never get back to a 90% in the office. It may be 50-50. It may be 4 days a week, 1 day off. We're going to see lots of different models. And so I think that the job of the CISO and the CIO is really to look at their security controls in light of this new assumption. What many did in the early days of COVID was look at what are some things they could do, some technologies they could adopt that were sort of sitting in the background. There were a lot of initiatives to do remote work or to do telework that just weren't high priority. And so they brought those to the fore and they deployed those quickly to get them out there. And everyone sort of dealt with some of the scaling issues or the complexity of having to do weird sign-on multi-factor authentication use cases for their remote workers. I mean, some organizations had to figure out how to get that token or that key fob into the hands of all their employees when they're already at home. And so there was a whole process that had to be figured out. What we're seeing now, and I've had conversations with CIOs and CISOs across the federal government, is they're taking a look now of what they did and what can be moved forward. Because what they're definitely, even for those that are going to go back to work in the office, the ability to have remote work really made it more flexible and made a better working environment for their employees and allowed them to be able to have access to talent that wasn't geolocated to the specific organization. So they allowed them to reach out to developers in other states or other locations and leverage those resources. So I think everyone's looking at how do they refactor their security in light of remote work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of content that was put out. I did a couple of talks on the changing dynamic of how do you do secure teleworking. And it's a combination of extending your enterprise. So think about your laptop. How do I give those services to you that you would normally get from just connecting to your computer in the office? But the other big shift we saw was a move to cloud-based services. So instead of me trying to get my network to reach into your home network, giving you access to services through the cloud, through SaaS kind of use cases, whether it be Office 365 or Salesforce or other kinds of models, to allow you to be able to securely access those kind of services without having to break the security and mechanisms I have for my corporate enterprise.
And when you think about cybersecurity and and I appreciate that there's a multitude within that, what are the kind of the top 3 or 4 things that kind of you most commonly come across?
So I think when it comes down to the cybersecurity sort of maxims or things that you need to do, it really comes down to understanding the data throughout its life cycle. And I think if you focus on the data at rest, in transit, in use, and from generation through destruction. And so it's sort of those 2 angles, all the different ways you use it and the life cycle from its inception through through when you have to get rid of it or when you need to get rid of it. Understanding that is how we can better secure our systems. Because at the end of the day, if we just take a systems approach where it's I want to protect a laptop, I want to protect a server, I'm going to protect this cloud resource, independent of the data that's running on it, we end up with the data breaches we have, we end up with the ransomwares because we're not thinking about the thing we really care about. Because you can always replace a laptop. It's very hard to replace the data that you collected on a particular day because once it's gone, you can't go back and get it. And we saw this in a lot of the ransomware attacks on hospitals where the records that were locked up were MRI scans and things along those lines that can't be recreated, that can't be just go bought from a supplier. And so it really is about focusing on the data and protecting it across the life cycle. The next piece of the puzzle, and this is where there's a term that's being used a lot now called zero trust. And for a long time, it was a marketing term of yet another way of trying to solve the security problem like defense in depth was. But at the heart of zero trust is really an understanding of I don't need to implicitly trust you. I'm going to I'm going to say no. And then I'm going to allow the use case or the user or the entity to prove they need access to the data or access to that resource. And then apply the controls commensurate with the data and with the risk. And so what zero trust really is at its core is this notion of being able to break that cycle of, well, I gave you access to our system, so now you're in and you've got access to everything. It's taking a more data-centric approach to saying, do you need to have access to this before I give it to you? And once you've proved you need, then I can give it access to you for a period of time. And when you're done, I can take away that access. And that shifts the whole model from the once in, you've got everything kind of approach that we've seen lead to a lot of these breaches and ransomware attacks, is that the outside was sort of hard, but once something got in, it was soft and easy to go from there.
All right, okay. You mentioned, you just touched on there about cloud security and and obviously, the whole cloud is kind of in terms over the last number of years has just, grown exponentially. But there still is, I mean, I don't know whether these are just the negative comments, but there still is that kind of, well, okay, but how secure is it? How do you allay that with your clients?
So there's a lot that goes into what is cloud security. One of them is understanding the different model from cloud security versus old style security from your systems. You're ceding control, and that's where a lot of the CIOs and CISOs really get up in arms, is that they're giving away control because they no longer have physical access to the box or the infrastructure upon which their stuff is running. That ship has sailed. Most organizations have content and services in the cloud and are using them, and then that goes from a local branch bank all the way to the federal government.
Yes.
Now the question is making sure that your cloud provider is providing you the security controls you need to be able to protect their infrastructure and your infrastructure on their infrastructure. And there's multiple tools of doing this. So part of it is contractually, making sure that you're contracted to have the right security controls, the right SLAs, if you will, in in your contract. But also it's about making sure that you've implemented the right security controls and attestation. And that's an important word, is being able to verify the infrastructure you're going into. Many of the cloud providers have the ability to attest or to give you the artifacts, if you will, that you're running in the right place, that the security that they're providing is being applied to your workload or your data, and that you're leveraging the right encryption features, authentication features. So some of it is about basically doing what you did on your enterprise and doing that in the cloud with your firewalls, with your access control, with your authentication. But it's also about turning on the switches inside the cloud to turn on encryption, to turn on the firewalls, to turn on the network security and network segmentation. The reality is that you can secure your applications and data sometimes better in the cloud than you can in the enterprise. And one reason is that you have the economies of scale.
Yeah.
In the cloud. And this has been one of those sort of hard touch points. It takes a lot of work to secure the cloud, but once you do that, you can deploy a patch at scale instantly. Whereas in the enterprise, you have to go and find all the different systems that may have that version that have to be updated and roll it out. In the cloud, you can say, I want all of my VMs to get this latest version of the Windows stack, and instantly you can roll that out at scale, which means that closes your window of exposure significantly and enables you to do it at scale. So there's a positive part to rolling security into the cloud, but it takes work in beginning stages to make sure you've planned for it. When we talk about things like the federal government and regulated industries, it's also making sure to go to cloud providers and take advantage of specific services that are out there to protect your applications and data. I'll pick on one great example is a set of services called confidential computing or confidential computing services. Major cloud providers have this as an offering, and what it does is allows you to take your data and applications and encrypt them while they're being transacted upon. So basically keeps the cloud provider from being able to access your data and provides that extra layer of security. These are services that are available today in the commercial cloud and in the federal cloud. You just have to take advantage of it. You just have to subscribe to that extra service and leverage it. And that's really the challenge of cloud security. That is very similar to when we went to the web or when we go to certain other security architectures, is that the features are there now. We just have to take advantage of them. And oftentimes there's a reticence to take advantage, or I have to do work to get that. And that's the cost of getting security in the cloud, but you can achieve it.
Yeah, so it's part of it is actually just letting go of the area of control, isn't it? And this feeling I can control it. Can I move on? Because I know that you're an expert in the whole area of AI, right? And for I mean, obviously AI is here. It exists in that, but for many businesses, it still seems somewhat futuristic, right? But the future is now. What should businesses be doing generally in terms of preparing themselves to embrace AI?
So that's a really good question. And to be clear, I mean, it'd be too hard to be an expert in all things AI. There's 100 domains of AI. I have expertise in certain areas of them, but one of the things that business owners should be looking at is how can AI help them in their business process and in their efficiencies. The reality is most organizations are leveraging AI someplace, even if they're not really aware. I mean, the fact is, if you're driving a modern car and you have lane shift assist, you're using AI. If you use your phone to take a picture of something and it auto recognizes, you're using AI. So AI is being used. Even in manufacturing, which you don't think of as being the most high-tech industry, quality control and defect control is all using AI and image recognition to find that defect in real time in a manufacturing process. So we're seeing it being adopted. Where it has the bigger impact is when it starts being built into their business process. And so things like business process automation, efficiencies in acquisitions or in HR processes. And then more recently, and this is one of the areas I think there's a lot of opportunity, is in decision making and strategic alignment. So using data analytics and data science along with AI to better inform strategic decisions, better inform whether it be mergers, acquisitions, site locations, services deployment, customer relationship. That's where we're seeing a lot of the benefit of AI be taken advantage of on the business side of it. Now, it's not always been called AI. Sometimes it was business process automation or data analytics and data science, but really that's all being used with AI. And the ones that are being really successful are taking those large-scale data analytics and then training models so that they get better results and faster learning to make better decisions. So examples that we've seen, I'll pick on the Air Force was a great example of they used an AI and a data science approach to get better efficiencies in their acquisition process. So to reduce redundancy across different contracts, to identify areas where they weren't being efficient in the contracting process. And they used the data set was their contracts and their contract systems. So they had all the data in the actual contracts and all the documents that led up to a contract, the back and forth emails. They were able to then mine that and then look at, well, how can we make this more efficient? How can we save time, save money, and get rid of redundancies in the process and in our contracts so that they can get more efficient about their process? That success, and they've actually talked about, there's been papers written about it, is a model that any business could use about how they better approach their business processes. And so I think data science and AI are really going to help transform the business processes, not just the cool visual computing and Tesla-style autonomous driving.
Oh yeah, okay, the sexy part.
Yeah.
That we all see. We just touched on it briefly there a little while ago. We were talking about, with the whole shift in work and obviously, whatever way it's going to be, post-COVID, whenever that is, but it's not going to be 100% back in the office in the way that it was. So it's going to be different. And I mean, there's all the issues around security that we touched on. But how do you see, what role do you see technology playing in this? Because it's a different way of working. It's a very different way of working. And whatever we land on is going to be significantly different to what we were in general accustomed to before. Where do you see the kind of technology innovation is going to play a part in that?
It's a really good question. And technology is going to act both as an enabler, as we've seen, whether it be the collaborations like Zoom and Teams and WebEx and all the others where we are able to communicate with each other, and the little features that just make it more natural, to innovations that are going to take us beyond this initial phase of remote collaboration. So let's separate it into two buckets. We're seeing technology be an enabler, and whether it be, I'll pick on some examples, like in the desktops and laptops that are being built today that you're going to use at home. Your phones and your tablets that you're using at home have built-in technologies now, or in the roadmaps are building in technologies to give you better user experiences for virtual communications, for that digital side of things, being able to handle a lot of the AI on the back end in the desktop and in the laptop, to enable you to have those kind of visual experiences that you're going to want to have going forward. Building in security into the hardware so that you can secure the enterprise all the way out to the home network and do that segmentation that's necessary. But at the same time, we're seeing innovation in the kind of services that we're going to want to offer to our partners, to our customers, whether it be things like remote or automation in chatbots, being able to give you services and be able to provide those services in a more automated fashion and be able to give you real-time responses, whether it be tech support or knowledge management kind of use cases, where AI is going to help enable you to be able to get the information you need quicker without having to go through multiple steps and trying to find the right manager who understands that problem, because the AI can actually interact with you in a more natural place. And so we're seeing the AIs come in and actually provide better service to the end customers for the, and that what they call that robotic automation or remote process automation, where it's an AI-based model to get you to a lot of, 80% of the information you need or 80% of the services you need before you have to actually talk to a human. And that then frees up the humans to go focus on, upgrading systems and doing what IT likes to do, which is build and maintain the networks and infrastructure.
Steve, you operate in a fascinating world, and I'm sure that, it's obviously as clear that, this is a fascinating time in the world that you operate in. So this has been really interesting. Can I just ask you two questions before we wrap up? And also you can tell people how they can get in touch with you and reach out to you. But two questions I do ask everybody. One is a book that has had a significant impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
So the book that had probably the biggest impact to me was Jim Collins' Good to Great. I read it early in my career, and it really has informed various different aspects, both when I was a serial entrepreneur as well as at Intel at a large corporation. A lot of it about how you surround yourself with people that can get the job done and enable you. And I think one of the quotes from the book that really helped me were two. One is surround yourself with people smarter than yourself. And I've taken that to heart in every organization I've worked in, is to make sure you've got the right people around you who are definitely smarter than you are. And the other is understand your business. And he gives great examples of that many organizations think they're in the food service industry when actually they're in the real estate industry, of having the right real estate for the flows or the right logistics to be able to support their retail organization. I think that's the thing, is understanding your business, understanding what really is your value to your end customer, was those two learnings that I took from the book, along with all the other great content he's put into that book and then the sequel. Really had an impact on how I've run and lived in my companies beyond.
I mean, isn't it interesting, actually, Steve? Because I mean, that's written quite a few years ago now, but the principles that Jim Collins talks about, and they are as valid today in a very different world and environment that we're operating in than at the time it was written. Yeah, but it's a great book. It's a great book. It is a great book. Second question is daily rituals, if you have them, and what they are and what they do for you.
So I think the two daily rituals that I take to heart, and it's become even easier now, honestly, during COVID, is breakfast with the children and dinner with the family. And so being able to have that quality family time to begin the day and to end the day, it really helps. It helps you sort of separate, and this way you can then focus on the family, but also allows you to focus on the job and on the things when you need to. And so having that daily routine of being able to really just have breakfast. I have very small children, and so being able to have time with them in the morning sort of tells me, why am I going to work? Well, I'm going to work for them. And so it really just reinforces that.
Well, it's great bookends to the day, isn't it? It also separates the kind of the home life and the work life, which I think for many people in this environment has been a challenge. So Steve, can I thank you so much for joining us today? It's been fascinating. How can people get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn/Sorin, Sorrin is the best way to reach out to me, and just message me and I'll be happy to connect.
Steve, we will put all of that in the show notes. And again, thank you so much indeed. It's been a really fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.